Michael Bisping versus Dan Henderson, Part 2, the rematch. I want to throw this fight out to you guys, the fans, for a couple of reasons. Some of the reasons are, they fought at UFC 100. Dan Henderson smashed him, and he said he was going to do it on The Ultimate Fighter. He said he was going to shut him up. He was going to shut his face, and that's exactly what he did. It was vicious. And before that, he only had one loss in his entire career. The Rashad Evans loss at UFC 78 really set Rashad and Bisping apart. And Rashad went on to fight for a title while Bisping had to wait 10 years or 9 years from that moment to get the title. He has it now, and he wants to defend it. And he wants to go back and avenge some of these losses that haunt him. And one of them is a Dan Henderson loss back in 2009. In that second round, we saw Dan Henderson with his fist clenched. He knew that he could hit Michael Bisping, and he had his number, and he was pretty cocky about it, and it landed. And Dan Henderson is much older now. He's really in the twilight of his career. He's 45 years old, Dan Henderson, and he just had a spectacular fight at UFC 199. The same night that Michael Bisping won that title, he was on that pay-per-view, and he knocked out Hector Lombard with an elbow, and then came back and threw that same kind of arm punch where you use your forearm to just smash the bottom of Bisping's jaw, and he landed it on Hector Lombard, and Hector Lombard went stiff just like Bisping did. And then later on that night, Bisping went out there and knocked out Luke Rockhold as a huge underdog, such a big underdog. The betting people, whoever bet on Bisping, won, and the fans were shocked. And Dan Henderson might have one fight left. Now, should we give him this fight? Does he deserve his chance at glory? I'm going to ask you guys, the fans, if you think Dan Henderson at 45 years old can pull off the unbelievable. You know, in a Randy Couture-esque story, get the title in UFC and retire like GSP did, but knocking out Michael Bisping like he did at UFC 100. Well, I got to take a pick here, and I think Bisping's a great fighter. I was not so surprised that he won that fight versus Luke Rockhold. I was surprised, but I wasn't that surprised. Michael Bisping and Dan Henderson are two warriors, two classic guys of the sport, two guys who got what they wanted out of the sport. They didn't just give up, or they didn't let things defeat them. They persevered, fought on till the very end. And that's definitely what Dan Henderson did. So if Dan Henderson doesn't retire, I say we give him this fight. I say that this is the best fight for both these guys at this time. There are other guys that deserve to fight Bisping, but none more than Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson, he deserves it. He was the Pride champ. He's done so much in this sport. And, you know, even though he lost 3 out of his last 5 fights, I think he deserves his chance. He didn't get it versus John Jones. This is the time for Dan Henderson. Can Dan Henderson beat Michael Bisping at 45 years old? I say yes. And I'm going to go with Dan Henderson here. I know from watching the first fight that he has figured out Michael Bisping's unique striking style, and that for him, it's nothing even at 45 years old. So Dan Henderson, if you get this fight, you will win it. Dan Henderson, next champ if he gets it. Crazy. Hey guys, this is Paulie G here, and I just wanted to say that I'm an animal lover. I've had cats, I've had dogs, and my last few were rescues. I have 2 dogs now, and I wanted to say that if you love animals as much as I do, and if it hurts you to see them put to sleep almost like they're worthless, please reach out if you have the time, the space, and the love in your heart for one of these creatures